thank you very much all for being here today. And I've been campaigning all over the country in the English local elections. I was in Plymouth earlier this week. We've been in the West Midlands, we've been in Carlisle, and obviously doing a number of the London boroughs. And the campaign is going extremely well, even though the Labour Party's ability to produce good microphones is not is still continuing to not. It's got a mind of its own, has it? It's a bit like you, Josh. It's got a mind of its own. So thank you all for being here and all that you're doing for the party. And I have to say this, that the meetings we're doing and the enthusiasm is absolutely massive and huge, because people realise how important these elections are. In the general election last year, we were written off by all of the media and all of those experts, and they couldn't have enough of writing us off. And do you remember the rally we had in Hebden Bridge? Hands up the people that were standing in the river at the time. It was utterly extraordinary. It was the most amazing rally, because it started off in one room and then moved to a bigger room, then moved to the courtyard and moved to the street, and there was people outside even as we were leaving to go on to the next rally. And we did a whole lot of rallies that day because we were determined to get all around the country. And in that election campaign, we showed three things. One is the way in which our politics has for too long been defined by out-of-touch and out-of-time people in national media who simply do not understand the feelings of ordinary people all over the country. And it was the unbelievable levels of commitment and enthusiasm by Labour Party members and supporters to go out and campaign, to go out and have those discussions with people, so we were listening as well as talking to our potential supporters. And it was the combination of reaching out to millions through social media, a manifesto that meant something to people because it promised transformation of our society, and of course the public rallies that we did. So in a sense it was the oldest possible way of communications. That is, you gather a number of people together in a street, round a tree or something else, and you have a chat and you talk to them, as well as reaching out in all the most modern ways possible. And we got the biggest swing to Labour since 1945, and we got the biggest increase in Labour vote ever during an election campaign. But sadly, we did not quite win the election, and therefore these local elections are very important because they provide the bedrock, the basis on which we can win a general election, and getting Josh elected here is absolutely crucial to that, as well as supporting and defending Holly in her campaign as well. We want a full House of Labour MPs in Calderdale. All those incredible traditions of the Labour Party in West Yorkshire, the way it was founded, the way it grew, those brave people that stood up for peace when it was difficult, those that questioned going into the First World War and were pilloried and challenged as a result of it, those that have consistently stood for peace, environmental justice and social justice, those are the very heart of the Labour movement and the principles that go with it. And what Josh just said about our meeting in 2003. Last night I got a call from the Prime Minister very late, and she called me to tell me that she was about to authorise the bombing of chemical weapons sites in Syria by British aircraft along with the French and the Americans. And she said, "What do you think about that?" I said, "Well, you know perfectly well what I think about that, because otherwise you haven't been reading anything over the past few days." And I just want to make this very, very clear. The war in Syria is abominable and appalling by any stretch of the imagination. It has cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of wholly innocent people. It has driven millions into refuge. It is a multifaceted, multi-sided civil war in a country that deserves anything but a civil war. 12 countries are already involved in military action in Syria. And so, surely to goodness, it now is the time for the role of the United Nations to come forward and be preeminent in this. And so, this morning, I've written a letter to the Prime Minister, a very substantial letter, questioning the legality on which British forces have been deployed in Syria. Because it isn't an act of self-defence, there is no authorisation from the United Nations, and those criteria have to be met. They have not been met. Antonio Guterres yesterday appealed to all members of the UN, particularly those on the Security Council, saying, halt, stop, pause. Come together for a ceasefire and a political solution that will bring about a long-term peace for all the people of Syria and recognise their strength and their diversity. My fear is that this bombing could escalate the war, could make it more dangerous, and could result in something really dangerous between the United States and Russia over the skies of Syria. That's why, on behalf of the Labour Party, I've said we do not support this action. We do not endorse what you've done. We want the UN to be centrepiece in this. We want you to be moving might and main to stop the fighting now and bring about peace for the people of Syria. Asking for peace is not a sign of weakness. Asking for peace is a sign of the moral strength of the argument that we want to put forward. And I want to lead a Labour government that will play that role in the world, that role of defending and supporting human rights and bringing about peace and justice. I condemn all of the human rights abuses in Syria by all sides in this conflict, including the regime of Bashar Assad, as well as all the other parties to that conflict. And that, I think, is important to make clear today why we're saying all of that. But we're here today also to campaign for the Labour Party and for a Labour government. We gain control of councils. We know the consequences of it. We have to deliver for the people as best we can. But local councils all over Britain have been hit hardest by austerity imposed by the Tories and the Liberal Democrats in 2010. You could draw a map of this country and colour in all the places with the greatest needs and the deepest poverty, and you could colour them all in, say, red. You could then overlay it with a map of where the biggest cuts have taken place and colour it blue. The blue would obliterate the red. And the reality is the rise in homelessness, the rise in child poverty, the rising school classes, the endless waiting time for social care, the hospital waiting lists, the shortage of police officers on our street, the stress of teachers and so many others working in our public services can all be traced back to a policy of sorting out the banking crisis at the expense of the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. And so this election campaign gives us the chance to expose what this Tory government is doing, has done, and as long as they stay in office, will continue to do. And sometimes when I'm asking questions to the Prime Minister at midday on Wednesdays, you kind of wonder if you're in the real world or some sense of unreality. I ask questions about why we've lost so many mental health nurses over the past 8 years, why there's a mental health crisis, why the CAM services have been so decimated. And I'm sort of given some candy floss answers saying, well, the Honourable Gentleman doesn't really understand what's going on. Well, I think I've got a pretty good idea. And if you're going through a mental health crisis and you're told to wait 6 months before you get talking therapy, that is a disaster for you and a disaster for all of us in our community. And so, when you go out on the doorsteps talking to people, please also listen to people, because our party grew from the grassroots. It grew from people with vision and ideas, those organising unions in the most difficult circumstances, on the railways and the mills and the mines. They developed the basis of the Labour movement and the Labour Party that came from it. But they did it because they were representing what people wanted, what their natural aspiration is for themselves and their future, and the kind of society they want to live in. And our campaigning, therefore, has to be one of listening and developing our policies by that means. And so we're now consulting all our members and supporters on a number of policy areas, one of which I'm very proud of, and it's a very important one, is the concept of a national education service. This party's greatest achievement was the establishment of the National Health Service, no question about that. Healthcare, free at the point of need for everybody in our society as a human right. What an incredible legacy. It is being threatened, it is being cut, there are closures, it is being sliced up, diced up, and given away to the private sector in large measure. But it's still there as a principle. I want to bring it back into public ownership, back into public administration, back as a public health service. And so that will be a huge task for us as a Labour government, and to properly fund social care and properly fund the mental health services, which I feel very passionately about. The idea of the National Education Service is the principle that education has to be there for all of us throughout our lives. And if you think about it, the greatest impact on a child's development and life is actually in the very early years. The conditions under which they're born, the housing they live in, the poverty or otherwise that they're born into, and the nursery education that is or isn't available for them. I want a Labour government to be the one that makes sure every child from the age of 2 gets 30 hours a week of nursery opportunity for social development, interaction, growing up together. So very important. And primary schools where the teachers are not stressed out by overwork, class sizes that are too big, and head teachers having to make awful choices about whether to ask a teaching assistant to go or a teacher to go or to sell something that belongs to the school. That is not the right way to treat future generations. And so, as a Labour government, we will ensure that all children are properly fed in school by a free school meal for all primary and nursery children. Eating together, because eating together is growing up together. And the other thing, which isn't going to be that expensive but will make such a huge difference, is the principle of introducing a pupil arts premium for every child in our schools, that they can all learn musical instruments, they can all have their creative imagination available instead outdoors. And then later on, it is about secondary education, it is about choices that are often very difficult, but it's also about college and university education. It is expensive, and that's why we thought long and hard about it, but we made the commitment, made the pledge, and we retain and continue that pledge that we will end university tuition fees and pay for it by an increase in corporate taxation and to very richest in our society, so that young people can make a genuine choice what they want to do. But it's also about recognising skills in our society. For far too long, we've assumed that great achievement is an academic qualification. Yes, of course it's a great achievement to gain a degree or an academic qualification. Just as a society needs doctors, engineers and scientists, it also needs engineers working practically, it needs electricians, it needs plumbers, it needs all of those skills as well. And so it is about, through the National Education Service, ensuring we have a genuine choice on apprenticeships just as much as going to university for a degree. So we are developing our policies on the National Education Service now, and I urge you all, go online. I'm sure you're all online. Go online, because you all follow everybody else on Facebook, it's fine, and put your comments in. So hopefully by the end of June all those comments will be in, and we can start collating them and then put a full statement of what our National Education Service will look like to the Labour Party conference in Liverpool in September. Think about it. A Labour government coming into office, our great legacy will be the principle of education for all, from cradle to grave. There's so much more we have to do. To challenge injustice and inequality in our society, the gender pay gap, the way in which so many people with disabilities denied the opportunity to make their contribution to society by poverty, by the horrors of the capability for work test, and the misery of their lives that follows as a result of that. A Labour government would value everybody in our society in the same way that we were pioneers on the National Health Service, we were pioneers through the Chronic Sick and Disabled Persons Act in 1970, which Alf Morris introduced. So it's a Labour government and a Labour movement that will deliver all of that. But it's also about the world in which we live. I talked about Syria, I talked about peace, I talked about justice around the world. But it's also about the natural world and our environment. We would not be afraid to pick up the phone to Donald Trump and say, listen mate, you're wrong about the Paris climate change report. He's actually wrong about quite a lot of other things, but we'll leave that on one side for the moment and deal with the issue of environment and sustainability. We live on one planet. We cannot go on with the levels of pollution of the rivers, the lakes and the seas and the air. We cannot go on seeing our children, not just in this country but around the world, asphyxiated by urban air pollution. Does that mean we have to say, stop the world, I want to get off? No. It means you have to have investment in high technology. You have to use to the maximum the scientific creativity that's there to conserve and preserve what we've got, recycle and renew what we can, and protect the natural world and the ecosystem on which we all rely. Which is why we want to build far more facilities for sustainable energy generation, far more solar, wind, wave power generation across the country in a sustainable energy system, locally run, often locally owned. So we will be promoting municipal energy companies as well. And yes, since you've mentioned it, we are opposed to fracking. I was actually about to come to you, but you're just too quick for me. So there is so much to do and so much to campaign for. What's exciting about our party is the size of our membership, the inclusivity of it, and the creativity of all of our members. Every one of us knows something that each of us does not know. We can learn from each other. We can learn from each other by working together. We can face the future with some confidence of what our party can achieve. We are belittled by those that are frightened of their loss of privilege and power in our society. Winning a general election, whenever it comes, I'm looking forward to seeing Theresa May on her walking holidays in Wales. She makes all kinds of decisions then. She could try West Yorkshire as well, there's even more hills. Should be fun. And that general election, whenever it comes, we're going to be out there. But we're going to do it differently next time. I'm not going to restrict myself to merely 100 events. We're going to do far more next time. We're going to get around everywhere. And so, will you please give your all to elect the wonderful people behind me here who are standing for council, not standing for parliament.